Yeah. So what you're saying is in South America, the alignment of the social issue left with the economic right. Yeah, but, as we know, not so much official, but yeah, that is not really taking place down there. It's kind of social issue left is also economic left down there.
No, yeah, yeah. I mean, but basically, you'll have a right which is economically right and which is socially right, which is to say, it's
Right.
kind of traditional conservatism, economically, liberal, neoliberal, um, uh, open, kind of closely connected to landowner interests or finance, and which, socially will use whatever materials it has available to kind of pursue a reactionary politics. So, the kind of the old kind of defense of the family or the nation or whatever. Recently, of course, with some of the kind of there's kind of populist. It's been given a populist sheen. So Bolsonaro being a good example of that in Brazil, of being much more explicitly anti-establishment. Even if in concrete terms, there's nothing really that much anti-establishment about it. There's a kind of a populist sheen to it, certainly of presenting oneself as an outsider and against the elite, which is different from the old Cold War Latin American right. And then on the left, what you have is basically no real serious economic left in a lot of countries, or it's certainly more limited and moderate than it used to be. And you have a kind of progressivist faction which has in many cases lost its working class base. That is familiar to any observer from Western Europe or North America, and so is forced to rely on sections of the middle class who have more kind of progressive social values and might be a little bit more humanitarian on kind of economic policies, but without any wanting to pursue any structural transformation to the economy. So it's more like that instead of this complete rearrangement and scrambling of ideological coordinates, you have a right which still looks like the right. It's it's conservative on economics and on social issues, and a left which is kind of center left progressive, but without any kind of radical left force in existence. So a little bit perhaps easier to understand.
Yeah, it's very easy for me to tie landowner forms of capitalism, somewhat more basic form of capitalism. It's easy for me to link that to the perpetuation of the kind of social issue right, family values. It's easier for me to link those two things than these sort of almost, I don't want to throw the term post-scarcity out there, but the kind of 21st century capitalism operating in the space of in a kind of culture industry space, very heavily reliant on marketing, reliant on software, and it's getting far away, in other words, from the very physical and more corporeal forms of older capitalism. So the kind of 21st century capitalism being aligned with the social issue right seems contradictory. It seems like it belongs with the left, whereas the property owning kind of 19th, before 19th, in fact, property owning landowner right seems very much in keeping with the kind of social issue, right? So
right, but I think that's like gets. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I mean I think this is evident, right, that things don't quite line up as you'd expect them to, because the social issues right, to put it that way, or those who are right-wing conservative, even reactionary on social issues nowadays, they're not traditionalists. For all the kind of trad LARPing on Twitter, they're not. We live in a world in which tradition has been extinguished, and so those who push advanced kind of tradition or traditional gender norms, for example, because a lot of these politics is kind of has this gender dimension quite explicitly, whether it's from the left or from the right. And these are not. It's not a continuation of old tradition and defense. Kind of holding on to what still exists against its challengers from the kind of cultural left, as was the case through the 1920s and 30s, and then another wave in the 1960s. By that point, the cultural left had probably already won. It just needed a final push, and that's what the new left in effect did. We're well beyond that now. The world is fully postmodernized, dematerialized. Tradition has been, has been defeated, or at any case, it's kind of withered away. So what you get is a kind of a right that in many ways looks and acts like the left. It's kind of rebellious. It pursues a lot of transgression, is provocative, right? And it might be provocative in pursuit of traditional heterosexual relationships between man and woman and whatever, for example. But it'll do that. The mode in which it'll do that is like through memes and through being provocative and edgy and whatever.
Like 1980 style borderline pornography, which then was so a lot of the trad people, the 80s are for them what the 50s were for the older conservatives. But the difference between the 50s and the 80s is just, it can't be overstated. It's orders of magnitude. The 80s are so much closer to where we are now than the 50s. So they've already conceded extremely, a lot to the left by glomming onto the 80s and using it as kind of a weirdly trad, even though it's reliant on a kind of salacious Playboy magazine type of thing. Yeah.
Right, and so it's not rooted in anything anymore. It's not necessarily rooted in kind of communities who live out this politics. It's another lifestyle politics. It's a lifestyle politics which is something that emerges from the world of consumption, but which then pretends that it's like a universalist politics, which might be applied to kind of everyone, at least within a given society. But it's not, right? I mean, it's not like it's a certain section, kind of conservative section of society with its own organizations and civic institutions and whatever, who then say, well, make a play for hegemony. It's just more social media bullshit, right? I mean, there's a kind of fakeness to all of this that I think neither side obviously wants to recognize, because everyone wants to pretend that they're in a kind of life and death struggle for the future of the world, when in fact kind of powerful things are probably going on elsewhere. It's not those arguing about trans rights or whatever on the internet. It's not actually decisive really about anything, because no one even really knows what the stakes are. Everyone pretends that the stakes are destruction of lives, many people dead. And, that's from either side, right? They're coming to take your children away. Again, both sides argue that. But there's a kind of weird unreality to it in both cases.
Yeah, I think we've left some have said we've left the age of ideology, which I think is not debatable. We largely have for most people. Of course, most people weren't really involved in politics before, and for them, just playing with memes is kind of their level of political discourse and debating ideas. But we've largely, we've left the age of ideology and perhaps moved into the age of demography, or we've left the age of policy and we're in the age of memes and vibes and current things. And I think a lot of that is due to social media. So, yeah, it's just. I think it's very tempting now to just dodge theory, dodge grand ideas entirely, and just kind of keep abreast of the newest, the meme of the week, the viral video of the week. Just kind of tally up your opinions on those things. Let's say the last 5 of those, and then you tell me where your opinions were, and I'll tell you if you're on the left. Forget books, forget all of it. Like this, we're just in the age of just a perpetual motion social media machine.
Right, but the funny thing is about the kind of end of ideology, yes, but it's been kind of ideology has been kind of subsumed by the market. So, you have the end of history where being into politics, and even prior to 1989, Gen X was perhaps kind of punky and rebellious, right? But it was not politically engaged. It thought of traditional political labels and kind of carrying, effectively carrying about stuff was lame, right? You're meant to be detached and ironic. And I have, relatives or friends, whatever, who are real kind of Gen Xers, who were kind of in their youth in the 80s, and see mine or other people kind of my age, and I'm not that, I'm in my 30s, but my late 30s, but they see a kind of even millennial interest in politics, let alone Gen Z interest in politics, as just like weird and lame. And it's like, well, these guys aren't cool. Back when we were young, we were cool. These people are just into politics. But I think they miss what has changed, which is that you know, one is that everybody is now a nerd and a fan. That's the means of it, kind of engagement with the world, particularly with kind of cultural products. And one of the ways you do that is by, picking products off the shelf and clinging to them really hard, even though they have there's no kind of real link to your kind of lived experience, other than, just as a kind of thing you consume, off the internet. And that's, I think, what people do with ideologies now. So now we live once again, in the 2020s, in a world in which ideologies, in terms of ideological labels that refer to politics, kind of everywhere refer, I'm such and such, you're such and such, oh, he's this type of guy, they're that type of woman, etc., right? All these sort of proliferation of labels and categories, which are not just kind of identity categories, which refer to how you see yourself and what you feel like, but also ostensibly what you believe in. But it's a completely different notion of ideology to what existed in the mid 20th century. So weirdly, there's kind of kind of what I've discussed kind of quite a lot, the kind of repoliticization, the kind of return of politics, but politics being weirder than ever, is precisely this notion that you kind of have things that look like politics, the shells of politics, whether it's political parties or political labels, which return, but without their traditional vehicles. So without actual organizations, without mass membership of trade unions and political parties and whatever. So that's kind of the weird hyper reality of this whole thing, that it's all kind of weird sort of simulacra, shadow play of labels and political reference without references, without the reference, without the real meat of the thing. So when you said, like, we're kind of living a kind of post ideological age, it's like, well, yes and no, yes and no. I think that we're still kind of beholden to a lot of ideas which we don't recognize, either because I think, or to rephrase that rather, you have the kind of post-political disavowal of ideology, which is, we're not ideological. We just examine things as they truly are at face value. And you see elements of this still, particularly within the kind of center-left technocracy types, who still hold to an idea of being post-ideological. And so, the pandemic provided them with a last gasp to say, hey, we're just trusting the experts. This is just a matter of the science. There are no political choices to be made here. It's just completely self-evident. You need to do such and such and such because that's what the science says, right? So there's a disavowal of politics there. But I think certainly with a younger generation, there's a kind of much more full-throated politicization. But it's as I say, there's a kind of hollowness to that. It's much more like symbolic identification rather than a kind of real engagement.
Yeah, you see some of this kind of this notion of neutrality and not being ideological. You see it a lot with the anti-woke liberals, and certainly the conservatives, those who would just call themselves conservatives, who are also sympathetic to that space and rub shoulders with it. When they bemoan ideology and Gen Z, or institutions being too ideological, they'll promote neurological diversity isn't quite the right word, but we promote ideological diversity, neutrality, empiricism, data-driven. You see that with something like,
right.
I don't know, University of Austin. I'm a little confused by that. It was this sort of like IDW endeavor to promote like a new university.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
I get confused because they say it's something University of Austin, but there actually is a University of Texas at Austin. So I'm a little confused by that. But yeah, you see it in sort of the mission statement for an institution like that, a kind of counter institution. So they're also kind of committed to this notion of no ideology or lacking ideology, along with the kind of COVID lockdown left, as you suggested.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think I don't know how much overlap there is between them, but in either case, I think they're both
Yeah, well,
kind of trying to
they
do the
don't
same thing.
really they don't really get along, which is kind of odd, but they do cling to that, interestingly. But yeah, the kind of IDW people are the ones who would be criticizing the believe the science left, but they actually have that in common. It's a notion of
Yeah, 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 yeah. And no, and again, like the kind of it's the old trope, but like the ideology is what the other guy does, right? I'm I'm just doing common sense, which is ideology. That's how ideology works itself. So in that regard, yeah, I guess nothing new
I've
there.
started to appreciate ideology at least as something to help defend yourself from being taken over by someone else's ideology.
Well, but that's right, isn't it? Because I mean, and like Slavoj Žižek puts this very well. There's the kind of typical clip of his from one of his films, I think, The Perverse Guide to Ideology, where he talks about put the son that takes John Carpenter's They Live. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I've definitely seen They Live, and I think I've seen that part of the Zizek. Yeah.
I mean, it's probably one of the most known clips of Zizek. But in any case, he flips things on their head because in the film, or rather, he uses that film because what is normally understood is that ideology is something that blinds you, and you take off the ideology glasses and you see the world clearly, right? Without all this kind of dogmatism that you're held to. And he goes, no, well, in fact it's the opposite, right? If you don't have actually the glasses of ideology, which can cut through things, and actually show you the world at least from some perspective, you're going to be even more stuck in ideology by being non-ideological, right? So the kind of most ideologically blinded people are those who profess no ideology. Those who say I'm purely technical, rational. I don't have any kind of ideological or philosophical priors. I just examine things as they are. No, that's completely misguided, because then you really are just beholden to ideas of which you're not even aware, right? So there's going to be limitations to everyone's perspective, everyone's method of going about of examining the world. But that at least provides you with a kind of a perspective which is allowed to see through some of the surface stuff, whereas being non-ideological means you're more blinded than anyone. And I still think that's basically right. It's hard to get beyond ideology, so you're better off saying, okay, look, if you are rigorous in sticking to certain ideals and ways of seeing things rather than just being completely eclectic, you're able to inure yourself from basically just going with the wind. Of going with the current thing and being influenced by whatever next kind of wave of enthusiasms flow through society, transmitted through social media.
Right. If Trump had been a bit more ideological, he might have been able to see the ideology creeping in, or not so much creeping in, that existed in, what his advisors were telling him.
Right.
I'm making it specifically about Trump again, which is not the greatest thing, but
everybody always goes back to Trump, dude. It's like any conversation you have. It's like I do a podcast. I've been doing it for 6 years, and it's like we always end up going back to Trump because it just provides such a great example for so much that you want to do whatever point you're making. It's like it's always a useful kind of Anyway.
Yeah.
Everybody knows him. Everybody you're not going to have to worry about explaining. I can't use Bolsonaro as an example because I have to explain too much about the everybody knows Trump.
Yeah, I know. It annoys me as well that the America-centric nature of everything. I'll complain about it, but then I reinforce it by using Trump. I didn't have to do that. I could have thought momentarily about it. Maybe it's someone else I could have drawn on, but they probably would have been someone from the the popular Western discourse anyway.
Well, but everybody knows the American president. I'm okay with that level of Americanization. I've been critical about it for a lot of other things, about the way that everyone kind of perceives themselves as American, whether you're in Finland or France, and it distorts an understanding of things, and everything becomes homogenized, and you lose the sense of the particular histories that have formed societies, etc., etc., etc. But using the American president as an example for whatever point you want to make, I think that's fair enough. Everybody knows the American president. That's just a real reflection of American hegemony, which is fair enough.
Yeah, and he's not even the president, but by the sheer amount of times he's referenced, you think he still would, it still is.
Well,
But
yeah. The most
Yeah.
important American president of recent years, probably. You know, I mean, I think I can't remember what I was reading the other day, but which talked about, you know, kind of the post-Trump era, and not, you know, not in the usual hysterical treatment of Trump as an aberration, because Trump is no aberration and certainly not worse than any of his predecessors as a politician. I mean, you know, kind of. Reagan did far worse things, you know, than Trump did, but in my view, but you know, I think he nevertheless is such a divider of waters. Is that I'm not even sure if that's an expression in English. It is in Portuguese, and I've forgotten whether it is in English or not.
what?
It's a divider of waters.
Divider of waters. Yeah.
Yeah, but is a watershed? I don't know. In any case, you know, is a kind of a real
party. I mean, I've heard of parting the sea in that general.
Yeah, that's something else. Yeah. No, that's yeah. Anyway, but you know, a kind of a watershed in a certain, you know, a kind of a point at which, you know, things separate to either side, and
yeah,
and
like watershed.
And he really does kind of, you know, mark that, and all politics in the U.S. currently, and I think will for a while, refer to itself either around Trump as a figure or Trump as a moment in American politics where things changed. And you know, there were things which were obviously latent there. It didn't just happen in 2016. But you know, the further away we get from it, the more, at least I feel kind of vindicated, and us on BungaCast kind of feel vindicated for having chosen 2016 as this you know, dividing line for the kind of the end of history, because I think the further away you get from it, the more you can say, yeah, actually, that was the moment that things changed, or at least the things that were changing became so obviously manifest you could no longer ignore them.
Yeah, and yet there is a kind of, you know, underpinning of continuity, of a more, well, see, I don't know, I've been wrestling with this. Like, is there a sort of underpinning of like material continuity despite all the discourse that we see on social media, and the way things are talked, the way Trump is talked about it as this real decisive break from the past? I guess I'm going to try to turn a statement into a question. Do you think that there is an underpinning of you know, capitalism and political continuity that is not actually that threatened by these noises?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, a lot of it is froth, but I would put it, rather than just kind of a question of continuity or discontinuity, I would try to trace out certain kind of structural elements which are in decay and at what stage of decay they're in. So, you know, Trump marks certainly the kind of the end of history, insofar as what we talk about in terms of consensus politics, in terms of the idea of there being no alternative whatsoever to the market or to neoliberalism. Not that there's, you know, huge, great alternatives there at the moment, but there's certainly a rebellion out there against it, and a kind of return to politics, repoliticization, which marks a real difference from the 90s and 2000s. But there's something also on a longer time scale, which is also ending. And so I think what we're witnessing now is the end of the 20th century. So all those major political forms which made up society, certainly from a political perspective, are in very advanced decay, if not complete collapse. And that is probably most clearly understood through civic associations, right? The kind of you know, the kind of bowling alone thesis in terms of the number of kind of membership organizations that people belong to, trade union density, political party membership, church attendance, which the U.S. might be a slight exception, but not that much. You know, and you know, local business associations, et cetera, right? As well as the kind of regular alternation between center-left and center-right parties, which is a real feature of, you know, the post-war period in North America and Western Europe. These parties which represented the working class and the middle class broadly speaking, but which also sought to be, to a certain extent, catch-all parties. That's also falling apart. You have, the kind of inversion and the rise of the Brahmin left, as Piketty has most kind of discussed, and where the kind of increasingly the left is supported by the middle class, and the right is voted for by the working class, at least the extent of the parts of the working class that still vote. So all these things, which are kind of seemingly permanent features of politics in the second half of the 20th century, in the post-war era, are themselves kind of falling apart. And so, I don't want to. That's maybe a way of evading the kind of continuity discontinuity question, but it's really about kind of the falling apart of the old, and various different olds, without anything new to emerging to really challenge it, let alone overthrow it. And that's why we don't have the discontinuity, because we live, I genuinely think, in a kind of proto-revolutionary situation, but without revolutionaries. So, objectively, all that the world has gone through, kind of the repeated series of crises, the general dissatisfaction, lack of belief in the system that anybody has, and that can be the political system or the economic system, or what have you, the lack of real chance of ascent for the majority of people, the constant confounding of people's hopes, all of that would lead to a really explosive proto-revolutionary, revolutionary situation if there was the politics there to see that through. And by the politics, I don't just mean the ideas, though that's a part of it, but also the organizations. That people are politicized through social media. Their politics is a kind of a media like, I guess a media phenomenon rather than kind of anything real in terms of their membership in political parties and etc. And so, like, that's part of the weirdness, but that's also the reason why there isn't a discontinuity, why, for example, neoliberalism continues. The broad structures of neoliberalism are still there, as much as many kind of neoliberal true believers, I don't know if you'd count yourself in that camp, but would not recognize the politics of today as what they had hoped for or what they dreamt of. And it's hardly like the way political economy is structured in the US today. It's not exactly like Hayek's dream or something, right? But nevertheless, nothing has really come to dislodge it fully, because and that's why it kind of seems to carry on in zombie form, because normally there would be an oppositional politics which would emerge to push that out, or there'd be political competition over the kind of over the carcass or over the future form that political organization and even social organization would take, and that isn't happening.
Yeah, this gets back to an old question that it divides the left and right at kind of a high level: is how much is complacency due to wool being pulled over people's eyes deliberately, or maybe not so deliberately, sort of unconscious forces, old school Marxist terminology and all that. But so are they being fooled, and are they actually full of this kind of latent capacity for revolutionary action, or have people never been particularly interested in that, and they're interested in what's going on directly in front of them in their own lives, and this lack of revolutionary action is not from some kind of attempt to trick or deceive people, but simply just what is sort of the default state of humanity. And revolutionary action is the installation of ideology or of an impetus to do something. It's not merely triggering something already there. It's complicated, but yeah, I mean, I would be more on the kind of right liberal question of that. I don't think people are basically in political mode, just simply waiting for that to be triggered in such that it reveals their true motivations and true capacity for living well or something.
Well, I mean, I to a certain extent reject the dichotomy, because in two ways. One, I don't think that the lack of revolutionary enthusiasm needs to be a consequence of the wool being pulled over people's eyes. In fact, I rarely think, I think a traditional, orthodox Marxist wouldn't hold to any such idea of kind of manipulation, in like a crude way like that. People generally act rationally and can perceive to a certain extent their interests. The question is how they perceive their interests, what they perceive their interests as being. And that is something that can change, and it's subject to ideology, I guess. So, it's not like, well, obviously the masses should revolt, and they're not. So that means it's because the media is, telling them lies. I firmly, very strongly reject that sort of leftism, and I would call it leftism rather than Marxism, although there are certainly, I guess, certain kind of strains of Marxism which have advanced that sort of argumentation. But anyway, I think that's complete bullshit. I think what rather is the case is that, I mean, one, the history of the second half of the, well, even from the middle of the 19th century through the 20th century shows that genuine political engagement, public spiritedness even, and of kind of passionate ideological commitment and belief were real things, right? This is not just something that kind of leftist intellectuals like to make up and invent as a way of advancing their politics and saying, yeah, this is the way things should be. Like, no, that is genuinely how things many times were, and particularly if you take probably the peak of politicization in a society which was rather, very different from ours. But, if you take intra-war Europe, that was kind of the peak of politicization. Now, whether that itself is an exceptional period, one might, that would be the most downbeat conclusion that I could come to, which is to say, actually, the period from 1848 to 1968, if you want to put it that way, or to 1973, is an exceptional period of politicization, of ideological enthusiasm, which is something particular to that phase in human development and in the history of capitalism, and which isn't to be repeated. That would be, I mean, then I don't know what I'm doing this for. I don't know if that is true, then I don't know what I believe anymore, because then politics is impossible, or mass politics is impossible, and therefore, like, I don't know what I'm wasting my time even caring about this stuff. That would be the, but I for I guess obvious reasons I reject that conclusion, but also because I don't think that is necessarily the case, or we'd need to move a lot further in time for that to be demonstrated to be necessarily the case. So
I think there's a feeling now
politics is still possible.
Frontiers having been closed in a lot of ways. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So just to conclude, politics is still possible, I think, though there's serious questions to be asked about the nature of subjectivity today, about whether people genuinely desire freedom, want to govern themselves, or merely want to be governed. And I think that's a real question that we don't know. But there still are eruptions here and there of protests of people saying, actually, no, fuck this. I don't want to take this anymore. I don't want to be an object of politics. I want to be a subject of politics. I want to decide things for myself. And so, you have to go with that, even if those expressions are still, marginal and sometimes ephemeral and often too spontaneous and aren't given kind of continuity in any significant way. But, when that isn't the case, when that isn't happening, I don't think it's because people are being manipulated or having the wool drawn over their eyes. It's that they perceive, one, a lack of alternative. There's not an idea there which they can seize onto, which they can credibly believe in, they can credibly hope that will be the case. There's a sense of defensiveness, and that defensiveness reflects the lack of real material opportunities for advancement in society, and also a sense that your neighbor is your enemy, right? And that kind of breakdown of an organic solidarity which used to exist is also something that impedes politics. So people are maybe not willing to trust that politicians just coming in making promises, to the extent that politicians even make promises nowadays. They kind of don't anymore, which is part of the problem, I think. But they might not trust the politicians, but you would say that they could trust their neighbor, in a metaphorical sense, to see through a politics based on a shared interest. And it's questionable how much that's the case. But these conceptions can also change quite quickly. The 2010s saw a whole sequence of kind of small revolts and rebellions, and things to a certain extent have quietened down in a way, but that doesn't mean that it'll remain the case, because I think the problems that capitalism creates, it's not able to resolve, and so, you know, that still provides the basis for people to revolt, even if many times that, you know, there are other avenues for that, which is to say, there's the solution of nihilism, right, and whether that's a kind of turned inward towards drug dependency, suicide, etc., outwards in the form of terrorism, basically exploding your own sense of lack of self-worth and self-loathing onto the world, or through kind of individualist means of becoming an entrepreneur, and trying to lift yourself out of your class rather than advance as a class. Those means are always available when the collective solution isn't on offer, seems unrealistic, etc.
Yeah, that's the perpetual discord there between those who are seeing an avenue for improving their lot and taking the rational action of doing that, yet everyone who does that sort of undermines the collective action of trying to create a political solution of some kind. It's tough to know, right? But yeah, that's a whole other thing we could have discussed, the anywheres versus the somewheres, or that whole discussion, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe for another time. Yeah, but it is interesting.
Some people say that left and right is not the division anymore. It's the somewheres versus the anywheres. And when I hear that, I'm thinking, oh, that is kind of like a left and right thing, though.
Yeah, it has maybe become that.
It could be squeezed into the old one.
But yeah. Another one of these choices, which I'm like, I don't want that choice. I reject that choice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I listened to a podcast of yours with Kenan Malik. I don't know if I.
Yeah, Kenan Malik. Yeah.
Kenan Malik, and yeah, he was talking about. Well, you guys sort of delved into or alluded to the notion of a universalism that is not consumerism. It's very difficult to get or to get people to appreciate. Yeah. I think a lot of the trad domination of a lot of online discourse, at least that I see, has made universalism basically synonymous with what they, derisively call GloboHomo.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so,
a phrase which I've unfortunately only read a couple of times because it's just like ridiculous. But yeah.
I know. Yeah. To talk about in the kind of rationalist space that I've been privy to and everything, they use the term. Oh man, I had a different term. Anyway, well, poisoning the well. That's a well understood concept. But thought-terminating cliches.
Yeah.
Thought-terminating cliche. When I see that word, GloboHomo, and then some of these other notions, I'm like, oh my god. It's like you're not really, you're dealing with someone who's just going to. He's not interested in unpackaging things.
No, you're dealing with the imagery, and you just want to go look at this picture. You don't like that? Yeah, let's all hate on this without really trying to unpick what composes that picture.
Right.
Yeah. No, but but it's all. I think also the fact that exists is testament to the absence of a left critique of supranationalism, in terms of its actual organizations, whether it's the EU or dependence on kind of, intergovernmental meetups and blah, 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 which left used to be more critical of. But as a consequence, that means that the kind of, elite cosmopolitanism and radical universalism have been kind of melded in the popular imagination, which is nonsense because they're pretty opposed. Anyway, I mean, you listened to that episode. I think we discussed stuff along those lines.
It's amazing how much a lot of the in the mid 2010s and late 2010s, where the IDW was new and everything, it was easy to think of oppositional as oppositional to left social issues, that kind of thing. But where I've been among the kind of online right so long now that I will actually be nervous saying something like, my first serious girlfriend was black, because they might think that I'm virtue signaling or something.
Oh man, yeah,
if you've actually grown up in somewhat of a cliched, multicultural, but positive and good kind of environment, it almost seems like you're some psyop to them, like that can't be real. But there are people who
I try to be as unguarded as possible with these things because it kind of gives me the chills, honestly. Like it gives you the creeps. Like this because you end up doing the kind of thought policing, internal, self-policing that the left demands, the kind of cultural left demands of people as well, right? No, you can't say that. And I'm like, fuck, I don't give a fuck who you are. I don't want the you can't say that, from any perspective. And so, I want to be able to say like, hey, it's nice that there's multiculturalism. I don't mean multiculturalism as a policy. I don't mean anything about any policies about whether it's about immigration or about integration or anything. No, I just mean that people kind of mix and don't judge each other by the color of their skin. That's all I mean. That's a good thing. I don't want to go any further than that.
And you end up having you end up. I have felt like I've had to guard myself against being policed by the right in the same way, a progressive might, feel like they have to preface not wanting to see the new Little Mermaid with, but I'm not against her being black.
Yeah, no. So
like that. Just like you have to, clear the air first somehow. Or
yeah, and I think this is a point which I was kind of discussing with someone on Twitter the other day, and I think it's very important actually, and it fits into what I was talking about earlier about the kind of withering away of what we understood as politics and the new form of politics, which is that if you were a member of a political party before, and you were a communist or a Christian Democrat, or, to use kind of terms from which would have been the most operative ones in Western Europe, but, whatever, those meant something, and that, you could kind of express your views about various things, and you probably wouldn't be kicked out of the party unless you did something pretty far out there. Whereas nowadays you belong to one camp or the other, whether the kind of like, whatever, you're a MAGA type or you're a kind of democratic socialist, but actually kind of total woke person, whatever. But because that doesn't have any kind of organizational form in any substantial way, you're subjected to constant loyalty tests of like belonging to one camp or the other. And so if you say something like because pro-multicultural on the right, or in defense of kind of, universalism or whatever, judgment or something like that in culture, which is, the people are like, well, that's racist. And you're like, what the fuck are you even talking about? That's not racist. But, it's a constant loyalty test. It's insane.
I think that that has to do with, like in these old forms of, political organization where showing up in real life mattered. You could offset words with actions, speak louder than words. But this online stuff, it's all words. So there are no actions to otherwise prove your loyalty. It's just, one error tweet or something caught unguarded, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So
okay,
Alex, thanks for doing this.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed that.
Big fan of your podcast, and keep
thanks
on and all that. Cool.
That's nice to hear. Cheers. Take care. Bye bye.